Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, so you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed to the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to the speaking list, the committee clerk and myself will do the best we can to maintain the order of speaking for all members, whether they be participating virtually or in person. Pursuant to Standing Committee 1082, the committee is meeting today to continue its study on the impact of COVID-19 on the aviation sector. I would like to welcome our witnesses from Air Canada. We have David Roux, Managing Director, Government Affairs and Community Relations, and Jim Chung, Chief Medical Officer. For WestJet Airlines, we have Andy Gimmons, the Director, Government Relations and Regulatory Affairs. Gentlemen, once again, welcome. We'll start off with Air Canada, with Mr. Roux and Mr. Chung. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Good afternoon, bon après-midi.
We are appearing before the committee today to bear witness to the devastating impact that COVID-19 has had on airline transport.
Officer. D'entrée de jeu,
First of all, I'd like to highlight the work of our employees, the flight attendants, the pilots, the mechanics, the personnel at the airports, our booking agents, all of these people and all our suppliers who have always worked so hard to allow us to continue operations. And for those whose jobs have been unfortunately affected by the pandemic, I can tell you that the whole Air Canada team is working relentlessly to preserve our business and position ourselves to rebuild our network. In 2019, we moved more than 50 million passengers on all inhabited continents. Our network linked Canada, the regions amongst themselves, and also destinations throughout the world. We have 3 main hubs, Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. And with the exception of China and the United States, we have moved more people than others who have been moved.
People in Canada and another 6,000 at our regional partners. We also supported 190,000 jobs in spin-off industry and generated an estimated 50 billion in total economic output, or more than 2% of the country's GDP. Air Canada and the aviation sector are truly economic enablers. As an airline, we are in the business of safety. The safety of our passenger, crew, and employees has and continues to be Air Canada core priority. This is what has guided us throughout this pandemic. Air Canada quickly implemented industry-leading measures for Clean Care Plus program to ensure the highest level of safety, and in many cases, ahead of government regulation, including pre-flight passenger temperature check and passenger and employee face covering.
And as the Prime Minister indicated last Friday, air transportation, we accepted to stop flights to the Caribbean and to the South.
As being catastrophic for the whole travel and tourism sector. Governments in Canada have imposed some of the strictest restrictions in the world, limiting intra-provincial, inter-provincial, transborder, and international travel. Demand for air travel has been devastated and airlines are losing massive amounts. In our case, we are burning around 15 million per day. We had to act to mitigate our losses and preserve our liquidity. We took the difficult decision to suspend a number of routes network-wide, including regional routes. We also had to reduce our workforce by more than 20,000 employees. These decisions were not taken lightly, but unfortunately, they were necessary. Cette situation ne peut perdurer.
This situation cannot carry on. This would risk the irreparable damage of our structures and the infrastructure of all air transportation in Canada. The government has to help the air carriers in Canada with a sectoral program. The figures are terrible. Our industry is in a very difficult position, and there is more than just dollars that is at stake here. It's the whole human aspect. In a major country like Canada, it is aviation that has allowed people to visit their families, to visit their friends, and to see the rest of the world, and to have trade with the rest of the world. In fact, there are many businesses that depend on export and so on. Other countries have acted already and have put in more than $200 billion to their air carriers to try to help.
Between carriers and government that are confidential, covered by NDA, and on which our ability to comment is, of course, very limited.
1 minute, Mr. Roux.
Thanks. In addition to sectorial support, other measures are needed to restart our industry. Air Canada is a strong proponent of science-based data-driven reopening of our borders. It can be done safely. The McMaster Health Lab study, which we sponsor at Pearson, has clearly demonstrated that a reduced quarantine requirement in line with CDC guidelines would protect against the spread of COVID-19 while allowing for a measured restart of the industry. Testing allows public health authorities to effectively identify and isolate incoming cases, reduces community transmission, and allows safe travel. Prime Minister said last week that government is committed to work with the major airlines on the future relationship between testing and quarantine requirement. We're hopeful that this committee will make a recommendation to that effect. Avant cette pandémie, le Canada comptait.
Before the pandemic, Canada had a competitive airline industry, and we were able to interact with our foreign competitors. To do so in the future, we have to help now.
Thank you, Mr. Roux. Very well done. We're now going to move on to WestJet. Mr. Gibbons, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon and contribute to your important study. We at WestJet have heard from many communities and businesses who rely on our investments to connect them and their economies to the world. Our approach to this crisis overall has been multifaceted, but rooted in our commitment to serve Canadians and conduct ourselves in a transparent manner with all levels of government. Before we get into details, it is important to thank our employees who have suffered so much, but continue to serve Canadians and persevere. Everyone in our company is fighting for you. COVID has had a devastating impact on WestJet, our employees, with bookings dropping as much as 95%. A staggering 97% of guests who had booked pre-COVID to fly between July and November ended up canceling. At our current booking levels, we would need 6.5 years to achieve our 2019 bookings. But this story is not just about bookings and revenue. We now only have 5,600 active WestJetters that remain from our pre-pandemic workforce of over 14,000. 1,000 of these are on leave, and another 4,000 have sadly exited a company and a career that they love permanently. WestJetters have been living in uncertainty, enduring a roller coaster of layoff, recall, layoff, with the fluidity and unpredictability of the travel restrictions we have seen. WestJet has had to make tough decisions. By slashing our costs by 60%, we have been able to implement our progressive refund policies and maintain regional air services to the greatest extent possible. Safety remains our top priority. We have implemented stringent health and hygiene policies that ensure the safety of our staff and our guests. We work very collaboratively with our public health partners. Since the pandemic began, we've operated more than 30,000 flights and carried more than 1.3 million guests. As former Minister of Transport Marc Garneau noted, there have been no known transmissions of COVID on board an aircraft. In September, we implemented a zero tolerance mask policy. This is just a broad highlight of some of the measures. WestJet wants to thank the Prime Minister for recognizing the measures we have taken to keep Canadians safe, and on Friday for calling us a strong partner in curbing the spread of COVID-19. Contact tracing is also an important step of stemming COVID-19. This is why WestJet has taken extra steps throughout the pandemic in advising our public, advising our guests, and our employees that have been affected by COVID-19. It is our understanding that we are the only airline group to post affected flights on our external channels and email any impacted guests. We're a proud partner with Vancouver International Airport, who you have heard from, University of British Columbia and Providence Health, on a research pilot that is testing the use of rapid testing for departure in an airport environment. We are also grateful to the Government of Canada and the Government of Alberta for the arrivals testing pilot that safely reduces quarantine times for arrivals. That study and pilot, we believe, is an essential piece of work that should remain intact. On refunds, a subject of great discussion at this committee, we remain the only Canadian airline that proactively refunds guests whose flights were canceled by us due to the pandemic, whether the fares purchased were refundable or non-refundable. We announced this important step in October and have been recognized by consumer groups and others for this progressive and proactive step. Our decision aligns us with the consumer-friendly policies in the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union.
1 minute, Mr. Gibbons.
Thank you. Last week, this committee heard from our union partners who are united in their advocacy for measures to allow Canadians to safely resume travel. We are not seeking a policy that strictly supports our bottom line. We are seeking a framework that will lower the cost of travel for Canadian families, introduce green credits for fuel-efficient aircraft, and ensure Canada has a competitive global airline based in Western Canada. There are two main priorities we recommend this committee include in your final report. The first is that given global uncertainty, Canada must prioritize domestic travel and negotiate a transparent and clear policy with provincial governments. This could be based on COVID levels or a percentage of population vaccinated. We believe this should be a priority item for the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and the Minister of Tourism. Canadians should be able to see their country this summer safely. 2, we recommend the transition of the Alberta pilot project into national policy and include funding for this in the upcoming federal budget. The relationship between testing and quarantine requirements must evolve, and we note the Prime Minister's commitment to work on this. In closing, I have a few brief comments about the proposed Air Canada Air Transat.
Pour conclure, j'ai quelques commentaires sur la fusion annoncée entre Air Canada et Transat. Comme le Bureau de la concurrence et d'autres groupes de consommateurs, WestJet a de graves préoccupations concernant cette acquisition proposée. Oops.
I don't know if I'm the only one, but I'm getting the French translation over the English channel.
Everybody else is as well. Mr. Clerk, if we can have that address, please.
Same. I have 30 seconds, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Should be okay now.
Okay, Mr. Gibbons, go ahead.
Thank you. Like the Competition Bureau and other consumer groups, we have grave concerns. Air Canada and Air Transat are number 1 and 2 on the transatlantic market. For that critical part of our global market, this would effectively be a merger between Bell and Rogers. Air Canada would hold a combined 94% share of the Canadian carrier capacity to Europe, and they would have a 70% market share on key routes from Toronto to London, Paris, and Rome. Should the government decide to allow this merger, we also believe critical remedies should be imposed, including Aeroplan, slot spaces at international airports, and the use of Terminal 3 at Toronto Pearson. Thank you so much for your time today, and WestJet will continue to be a collaborative partner with all of you as we work towards a safe and responsible recovery.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Great job. Now we're going to move on to our first round of speakers. We have, starting us off for 6 minutes, we have Ms. Cusi from the Conservatives, followed by Ms. Jacek for the Liberals, Mr. Barcelou Duval for the block, followed by Mr. Backrack for the NDP. Ms. Cusi, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Gibbons, very nice to see you. I want to applaud WestJet's zero tolerance policy with no masks, which I saw implemented in front of me on my most recent trip home from Ottawa. So it is enforced, as I saw someone marched off the plane as the rest of the plane applauded. I want to talk to you first about one of your last points, the YYC pilot. As you know, we as the official opposition have been calling repetitively, not only for a plan, but with rapid testing, testing on arrival, testing on departure as a cornerstone of this plan. Yet we did not see this government implement it. And as a result, they've come down with a sledgehammer as of recent as a result of their incapacity and inability to implement these other tools earlier on within the pandemic. And of course, now we're seeing this with the horrific vaccine rollout. But can you comment, please, on, first of all, why you think this pilot wasn't implemented? And secondly, what it's been like to implement these travel restrictions with very little notice. First, the December 31st PCR 72-hour, which is implemented only 7 days later, and now these incredible travel restrictions, which Canadians, but most importantly, the airline sector suffers in a rush to implement.
Mr. Gibbons.
Thanks very much, Ms. Cusi. Great to see you as well. Thanks for flying with us. I'm sorry you had to witness enforcement.
It was awesome.
You know, our staff take it very seriously, and the safety of everyone very seriously. So I'm glad. I actually am glad that you witnessed that. I'll start with the Alberta pilot because it's front and center and really critical. So we do think that, notwithstanding the Prime Minister's announcements Friday, that this pilot project should remain intact. And the reason we feel this way is because of his words on Friday. What he committed to was to look at the relationship between quarantine and testing. And eventually our country is going to have to safely restart, and we do have to find ways to do this safely. And if we have a made in Canada study with that data and research and experience from air carriers, airports, our guests, etc., let's not throw that away. Let's keep that intact. As long as it has the confidence of the public health officials in Alberta and the continued confidence of the Public Health Agency, we do think that that should remain intact because it gives us the best footprint and standing in order to move forward. And I'm just looking at my iPhone because I took a screenshot of Dr. Hinshaw's comments yesterday, because she was asked about the pilot as it relates to the spread of variants. And I think it's a really important tweet and message that she put out, and I encourage members to take a look. And she said, and I'll quote, "We have detected cases thanks to our lab and border pilot program, which has detected 28 variant cases. Under the pilot, we have tested almost 45,000 travelers on arrival. This has been a vital tool to stop the virus from spreading quickly within our communities." She goes on to say, without this pilot program, our variant case numbers would be lower, but the variants would likely be spreading more widely in our province without us knowing about it. We are working hard to break the chain of transmission, but we are not out of the woods. So the Alberta pilot, Mrs. Cusi, allows for 2 tests, and it allows public health officials to capture quickly what the variants are or not. And you will note that they've also adjusted the pilot, and it's shifted from quarantine release on first test to second test at 7 days. So I hopefully I've addressed how critical that is, both from a public health perspective, completely parking the economic side of that type of pilot. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to touch on the PCR measure before Christmas. Look, we put out a very tough communication after that announcement, and you know, we did call the policies incoherent and inconsistent. That's not typical of our company to speak like that. And the reason we felt that way, Mrs. Cusi, is because we did find out about that testing program in the media. And it takes, you know, we're so committed to public health and we're so committed to doing the right thing. It was very frustrating to not have our recommendations around testing put in place and then to be advised, you know, by the media that this was taking place. But the good news is we did our very best. Our company rallied. We did our best to find tests for our guests. and to get them home safely. And I think the reaction to that announcement is better illustrated in our commitment to do the right thing for our guests and work collaboratively with the government than it is our tough public response. So I hope that has touched on some of your questions.
Ms. Kusi?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Gibbons, I want to turn quickly to a topic which the Prime Minister keeps bringing up repetitively in question period. He seems to pass off the CEWS program, which I know WestJet took advantage of, as acceptable for some type of sector support for the airline sector, when in fact it was really a second-rate EI program, and more importantly, left Canada as one of the only nations in the world, much less in the G7 and G20, without any sector-specific support. Can you comment on CEWS and what else you would have expected from this government in forms of support?
In terms of support, I think the best guidance I could give you is the open letter that our President CEO Ed Sims sent to members on December 10th. And that really is the best reference point for how we feel about those issues. As Mr. Rowe noted in his comments, we are under NDA with respect to the actual negotiations and the substance of those. But I would refer you to that letter because it does speak to how we see that issue. With respect to the wage subsidy, we appreciate that. We have been thankful for the government. It has meant a lot to our people to stay connected to WestJet. You know how passionate our employees are for the work they do. So the ability to tie them to the company, which is the purpose of the program, has been valuable. We requested that program be extended earlier in 2020, and the government agreed, and they did that. So kudos on CEWS. Any comment that we make about additional support is not to minimize the value of that program because it has been valuable. But you are correct. CEWS or CEWS, I don't know which one. Everyone uses a different term. No matter how you slice it, that is not a robust industry recovery plan or an assistance package at all consistent with what other G7 nations and other countries have done.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons, and thank you, Ms. Kusi.
Thank you, Chair.
We're now going to move on to Ms. Jasek. Ms. Jasek, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say to the witnesses, I think every member of this committee is very aware of the devastating economic impact that COVID-19 has had on your industry. But lest we forget, it has also had a devastating effect on the health of Canadians. We have some 20,000 Canadians dead of what in theory is a preventable disease. So I'd like to ask Dr. Chung my first question. Dr. Chung, about a year ago, you would have been, as Chief Medical Officer for Air Canada, very aware of the fact that there was a novel coronavirus out there. A year ago already, we knew that the first case here in the GTA was of a Canadian returning from Wuhan on a plane. Please tell us what went through your mind, your thinking. You must obviously have a pandemic preparedness plan at Air Canada. What actions did you take? What advice did you give to senior management at Air Canada in the early days of this pandemic?
Dr. Chung.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. Again, this has been I do fully agree. This has been a significant challenge for everyone, all Canadians. I don't think there's anyone to blame per se for the pandemic. It really just happened. We were fortunate in that we had already developed a partnership with a company called Blue Dot, which is a health AI company that helped us sort of give us sort of almost an early warning into this pandemic. But I mean, I'd be dishonest if I said I didn't realize how much of a significant pandemic this would be early on in January. Having said that, we did, as you, Mr. Chair, as they mentioned, we did have a pandemic playbook that we had reviewed early on in January. And as most of you may know, that we did review our own internal processes, our pandemic response, and subsequently did make the decision to stop our flights to China. And, I believe it was January 26th.
Ms. Jasek.
In terms of personal protective equipment for cabin crew, were you ordering supplies? How were you preparing?
Well, we were Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were reviewing what our pandemic through our pandemic checklist, and part of that pandemic checklist is a review of what supplies are required and what inventory we had at that time.
In terms of the progression after the announcement that this was a pandemic and your suspension of flights, particularly from China, what further recommendations did you make to Air Canada in your role as Chief Medical Officer? I mean, I think we all know that obviously there's a first wave and a second wave in pandemics. So how were you preparing looking forward, and what recommendations were you making?
Dr. Chung?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. You know, it's not a single individual in any large organization like ours. It takes an entire team. So it was an entire team that did get together, did discuss these issues, including our Vice President of Corporate Safety and our corporate safety team as well, to review what was the best evidence out there. Initially, early on, as everyone is aware, there was very limited data and very limited information. If you recall back in January, February, about like what was the transmission risk, what were truly, you know, initially there was some confusion about masks, but whether they were sort of recommended or not recommended here. So there were a lot of challenges initially in that early time frame, though. But we did constantly consult with our public health colleagues, both on the federal and provincial level, as well as colleagues um, and resources and consultants such as Blue Dot and other infectious disease specialists to guide us and help guide us with respect to what are the best practices at the time.
Ms. Jessica?
I believe, Dr. Chung, that you were advocating for testing prior to boarding airplanes. You were interviewed by Lorraine Simpson, I think, in the fall, and you were making recommendations at that point. Did you discuss this with the Public Health Agency of Canada or any other public health officials?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Yes, I mean Air Canada has always been a strong advocate for testing. You know, we've always been I feel we've been a world leader, quite frankly, in this area in terms of advocating testing as a means of mitigating the pandemic and mitigating sort of risk of importation of infected or COVID passengers. And similar to my colleague, Mr. Gibbons, you know, we do firmly believe that there is a role for testing as a mitigation and as an exit strategy from the 14-day quarantine to reduce the risk, yet you know, keep the safety of our Canadians in mind, though. So we did launch the McMaster Health Labs GTAA study September 3rd, which ran 2 months, and we did collect 46,000 tests and 12,000 participants in that did to provide the data to that we did communicate and did discuss and share those details and that data with public health agency.
I was actually referring specifically to pre-boarding testing, which apparently you were advocating for last fall. So you couldn't have really been surprised when our government did introduce that early January.
Well, that interview with Lorraine System was directly in response to the Master Health Labs, the arrival testing. But there you know, certainly there is a potential role for pre-departure testing as well. I mean, there's pros and cons to that for sure, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chung, and thank you, Ms. Jacek. We're now going to move on to our next line of questioning in the block. For 6 minutes, we have Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Mr. Barcelou-Duval, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Air Canada has refused to refund its clients. But according to the third quarter report that you filed on November 9, $9.6 billion existed in the coffers of Air Canada. WestJet did it. Why can't you? Thank you for your question. First of all, I'd like to say that Air Canada has refunded $1.2 billion worth of tickets to its clients. All those clients who had bought refundable tickets were refunded according to the set tariffs, the set rates by Transport Canada. Now, with respect to your question, from the outset, we complied with the order, the statement by the Canada Transportation agency that said that for reasons outside of the control of the carrier, a voucher or a credit would be acceptable given the conditions. Yeah, and those travel credits, just to answer your question, as was publicly stated on several occasions, if there is aid that was required of the carrier, that it would be reasonable. And if we can get some aid from the government, we'll be able to refund. Yes, but in 2016, you laid off about many thousands of your employees, and many of the Airbus planes at Mirabel were set aside. But the Center of Excellence that you talked about at the time still doesn't exist, and you're still using certain aircraft. The ANPA union has told us that you have your planes maintained in the United States and Boeing in Britain as well. And yet there is a great deal of unemployment in Montreal. Can you not respect the promises that you made to Quebec workers to be able to make them have jobs before you go abroad to have your planes maintained? Well, this is a question that was asked by Mr. Barcelou. Air Canada has always supported the airline industry in Canada. We've been a big client for many, many years. The SRG and the ACC recommends many programs like Mr. Bellemare has noted with respect to the Center of Excellence in Quebec. We will honor the fact that these aircraft will be maintained in Quebec, but all those aircraft are held near Trois-Rivières, about 150 of them. Now, with respect to the Transat transaction, in addition to the employees that work in offices and so on, there has been an overlap on many points. There's an equivalent of some 60% for the Europe capacity and 45% of the capacity elsewhere. And also there's a new arrangement, it would seem, with respect to reducing the workforce. Now, if this really does come about, what's going to happen in terms of Air Transat? Can you guarantee that jobs are going to be maintained? If not, how many jobs will be lost? Well, listen, there are a lot of elements to this. I'll take this opportunity to answer what my colleague said when he was here. A merger between Air Canada and Transat, like Bell and Rogers, with respect to the transatlantic market, would be perhaps difficult. You have to look at Schiphol and Charles de Gaulle, two of the major hubs in Europe that receive many Quebec and Canadian travelers. With respect to the question, Transport Canada, 10 months ago or so, went through a very stringent analysis. They consulted airports, travelers, governments, municipal governments, provincial governments. And we are waiting the results of the public analysis. We are awaiting the decision. And we are quite convinced that the transaction would be beneficial for most people. As Mr. Eustache said, it's the best choice for most of the stakeholders, the suppliers, the employees, and the employer, and so on. I would tell you this transaction, to come back to your subject, will allow us to maintain more jobs in Quebec. That's a commitment that was made. And I can also tell you that unions representing employees, Transat's employees and Air Canada's employees are aware of what all of this means. They will be better able we will be able to better compete with the major airlines, the American airlines that are so much bigger.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're now going to move on to the NDP. Mr. Bachrach, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. My first questions are for Mr. Rowe. Mr. Rowe, since the start of the pandemic, and I believe you've shared these statistics already, but if you could remind us, how many Air Canada employees have been laid off?
Oh, pardon. Environ la moitié de notre personnel.
About half of our staff.
And in terms of numbers of employees, can you give a round figure?
20,000.
20,000. Yeah. How many of those workers who have been laid off are also receiving the wage subsidy?
So with respect to the use of the wage subsidies, I would say that, like my colleagues say, the wage subsidies has allowed us to maintain jobs. In fact, Air Canada was the first or one of the early adopter of the wage subsidies. And I think it was in March or in April and May, which has allowed us to keep all our employees at the time. However, it has become at some point apparent that we would not be in a position to recall all our employees in the short term, which was, in fact, the purpose of the program. So we work a lot with our union to mitigate the job losses, but unfortunately, we have to reduce our workforce. I would tell you that, as an example, today we operate approximately 20% of our network with 50% of our employees.
So, Mr. Rowe, I didn't quite hear an answer in there, but I'm assuming that the employees who have been laid off are not receiving the wage subsidy. I know there are other companies who have used the wage subsidy to furlough their employees and keep them whole through the use of the wage subsidy. Is that a strategy that your company has employed during the pandemic? So to take the wage subsidy and keep employees on the payroll using the wage subsidy instead of fully laying them off.
We did that, and we still have employees on the queues that are inactive. But at the beginning of the pandemic, we did that for all employees. However, it became apparent to a point that we will not be in a position to maintain all employees because we had no horizon for recovery. That's when we took the decision, and we worked with union to mitigate job loss. The issue with the queues is, despite the fact that the government subsidized part of the salary, which we're grateful for, it's not covering all costs. And in a situation where, like we are, we have to mitigate all loss, we have to make these decisions to preserve our liquidity to be in a better position to recover from the crisis.
Mr. Bachrach.
So, Mr. Rowe, public reporting suggests that since the start of the pandemic, Air Canada has received approximately $492 million in wage subsidies. That would make it the largest recipient of the wage subsidy in Canada. Are these figures accurate?
We have reported, I need to look at the exact number, but the amount of queues that we have received were disclosed in our latest financial statement. I think it was around 400 million. So it depends, when you get this information. But yeah, it might be accurate. I don't have the exact number, but it might be accurate.
Okay, ballpark. Since Air Canada started receiving the wage subsidy, has the company paid any dividends to shareholders or any bonuses to executives?
No.
Since the start of the pandemic?
No.
Mr. Rowe, how many tickets are affected?
And to my knowledge, Air Canada has never paid dividend to its shareholder for years.
Right. So my understanding is that Air Canada has been providing vouchers for flights as opposed to full refunds for flights that have been canceled. That's been widely reported in the media. Could you tell us roughly how many tickets have been affected by that practice of providing vouchers?
I don't have that number, sir.
Okay. Could you tell us what the approximate monetary value of tickets affected by the process of providing vouchers instead of refunds might be?
I don't have that number, but it would be a significant number.
Okay. Air Canada's financial statements for the third quarter of 2020 indicated the company had $7.7 billion in short-term liquidity, including $3.79 billion of cash on hand. Can you explain to Canadians why it is that a corporation with billions of dollars can't fairly refund their customers for services that were never provided?
I would say that a refund policy is compliant and in line with all CTA statements in order. We have abide by the terms and conditions of our tariff that are filed and approved by the Canadian Transportation Agency. We have refunded over 1.2 billion from the beginning of the pandemic to our consumer. And to your question, we need to preserve our liquidity to be in a position to be able to recover from that crisis. If you look at the numbers now, international competition is gaining back a lot of market share, and we have to get prepared to, go back in the market, take back our market share, employ more Canadians. That's why we are preserving our liquidity.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. We're now going to move on to our second round. We have, for 5 minutes, Mr. Cram of the Conservatives and Mr. Rogers of the Liberals. And following that, we have 2.5 minutes for Mr. Barcelou-Duval of the Bloc and 2.5 minutes for Mr. Bachrach of the NDP. Mr. Cram, you're on the floor for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to welcome the representatives from both Air Canada and WestJet to our committee today. I have a great deal of respect for both of your companies, and I'm certainly looking forward to flying your airlines a lot more in the future as we come out of this pandemic. So my questions for both groups of witnesses. On Tuesday, the committee heard testimony that because of all the challenges facing the aviation sector, it may take anywhere from 5 to 7 years for air travel to recover. I found this to be very surprising since the vaccine rollout is to be completed by the end of this year. So are the witnesses from Air Canada and WestJet expecting air travel recovery to take 5 to 7 years, or are you expecting the timeline to be somewhat shorter than that?
We'll go to Mr. Gibbons first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Cram, for your words, and thank you to your constituents for making us the #1 airline in Saskatchewan year over year. Look, if you had asked us in mid-March last year, where would we be on February 4th, 2021, it would not be where we are today. So, lots of people are throwing out a lot of prognostications, but you've nailed it, and that is that without a clear operating, without better understanding of what the operational realities will be for our company, it's really difficult to say. And that's why we're pushing so hard for a safe restart plan, and to understand how the government looks at vaccines and looks at testing. You brought up the issue of vaccines. We're watching very carefully and engaged very constructively with the government, because we need to understand what's the correlation between vaccination and mobility for Canadians. The retired couple that lives in your constituency that hasn't seen their grandkids in a year, is it their expectation that they'll be able to go see them after they're vaccinated? Does vaccination greenlight you to travel this country? What is an acceptable vaccine rate that would allow for such travel? These are the key questions I think we would recommend that you put in your report, that we recommend you ask public health officials for clarity on. And again, for public health purposes, not for business purposes. It's that certainty and reassurance that I think all of us want and seek. But, I think until we have better certainty around vaccines and what it means for the critical travel and tourism sector, it's difficult to answer your question, but it's safe to say that it will take years, but we can start here in Canada this summer.
Mr. Rowe.
So, thank you.
Ouais, juste pour ajouter sur ce que mon...
Only to add on what my colleagues said, obviously it's important to have a good plan. If we look at the IATA forecast, we're talking about a horizon of 3 to 5 years. What's important is that since we are planning vaccination for the population, we already have a plan to restart safety travels. And this is what is most important. Aviation involves many players. So it's important to have a plan so that the machine starts rolling again.
All right. And again, I would like to hear from both Air Canada and WestJet. In regards to NAV Canada potentially laying off air traffic controllers and closing down air traffic control towers, including the one at the Regina International Airport, when an airport loses its air traffic control tower, does it cause your airline to reevaluate the number and frequency of flights coming into and out of the city?
Start off, Mr. Gibbons. Short answer, please.
Look, we feel for NAV Canada employees. We feel for everyone in our sector who's hurting. That's why we've been pushing the government to resolve their financial issues. On the strict element of your question, we fly to airports that have towers. We fly to airports that don't have towers. We fly to airports that have towers part of the day and not other parts of the day. So, it's not a straight line. And also with respect to the safety of those decisions, that really is between NAV Canada and their regulator, but we're aware of the situation in Regina and feel for those employees for sure.
Mr. Rowe?
Oui, pour reprendre les propos de mon collègue, M. Cram.
To come back to what my colleague said, only to add, the loss of a control tower can have an impact on our operations. Obviously, safety is not at stake because there are other safety measures that are in place. So we never play with the safety of our passengers. But for operations, if there's no control tower, the operations become more complex. It means that flights will go towards other airports. So it entails problems for our carriers. I think that we are in a system of user payer. And since we haven't had any users for 1 year, so the costs increase for everyone. Difficult decisions have to be made that might jeopardize infrastructure on the long term. This is why measures have to be put in place to preserve our infrastructure and to allow us, the carriers and our employees and all the transportation ecosystem to come back to the pre-pandemic situation we were in.
Mr. Rogers, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to our guests. For both guests, I guess you could decide who wants to go first. Many people in Atlantic Canada and rural Canada are left wondering what it will take to restore lost connectivity. So from that perspective, then, how feasible do you think it will be to restore all regional routes that we lost after the pandemic subsides, and what kind of timeline do you anticipate before that would happen?
Mr. Gibbons?
Very good question, and really at the heart of our discussions currently. I do want to stress when we did cease services to many of our Atlantic Canadian cities, we did brief the premiers of those 4 provinces in advance, and we did so as transparently as possible. And the feedback, obviously I don't speak for them, but the feedback in those communities was obviously devastating. And we can think about Gander and we can think about Sydney. These are communities that WestJet investments fundamentally altered the affordability and connectivity in that region. People in that region remember what it was like before WestJet brought low fares and competition has really brought air travel to life in Atlantic Canada. In terms of restoring, the policies put in place by the provincial governments there, and they're under no illusions about this, and I don't mean this in a combative way. The policies are not designed to bring our investments there and to bring guests there. It's the opposite, and we understand that. So, it was a very reluctant decision that we made to cease services up to 80% and to cancel service to some cities. Mr. Rogers, I think it really depends again on the operating environment that the premiers and the prime minister and the governments want to implement. And if we can have a domestic framework, in Q2 developed in this country, where your premier and members of your provincial caucus can say, we'll be comfortable with Canadians visiting Newfoundland and Labrador when COVID level is X, or when this percentage of the population is vaccinated. I think if we get some certainty or a safe plan around that, that's what's going to be the biggest factor. But I also want to assure you, serving and investing in communities is not something the government has to extract from us. It's something we love doing.
Just if I can add something.
If we could add here from
Mr.
Mr. Roux, please.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I would say that, in our case, we had to reduce flights in many provinces and stations in Atlantic Canada. Was a difficult decision to take. We've been operating in certain of these markets for 75 years, at the time of Trans-Canada Airlines. And, contrary to our competitor, we try to keep at least one station in each provinces to keep province linked to our network. I would say that, to reestablish route, and I had many discussions. We talked to mayors, we talked to premier, exchanging on them, on the impact and how we can work together forward. But I guess fundamentally, to restore services, we need passengers. There has to be demand to have a service. And the policies in place, in particular in Atlantic Canada, have had a devastating impact on number of passengers. So that's why we need to have, a conversation and a path forward for a national reopening of travel, at least within Canada first. Yes.
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, so I guess from that perspective, I was going to ask you the question: which routes would you consider restoring? What might be the criteria to decide on which ones you would implement first, post-pandemic, or after the pandemic? What would be your likely routes that you might consider restoring first, second, third, and so on?
Mr. Roux.
I can tell you that we're looking forward to restore services. It's important for us to serve this community. And of course, it's going to depend on how the traffic start. These decisions were taken when we see it's difficult, because I'm telling you, like in a normal environment at Air Canada, we plan from a 6-month to a 6-month basis. Now we have to take decision on a week to 2 week, basis. So decisions are taking, very fast when we see traffic deteriorating. Hopefully, when the market will come back, it will come back in a pace that will allow us to reopen service, restore service at a quick pace. But it's very difficult for us to plan when we don't know what would be the demand in the next month.
Thank
Airline
you,
is
Mr.
about
Gibbons.
planning.
Mr. Gibbons, a quick
Mr.
answer.
Gibbons?
I'm not going to tier cities for you in this meeting, obviously. And just to reiterate, it really is going to depend on the demand environment and the set of policies and where COVID is in this country and how it's being managed. These are the essential ingredients. We were very sad to eliminate some of these routes, and we want to restore them as soon as possible. I'm not being coy. There is no there is no better answer than that. And we look forward to being back as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons.
And we look forward to having you back, both
Thank
of
you so much.
And of course, we're fortunate that the Atlantic bubble did one thing, and that is it saved many lives from our perspective. So we're quite happy from that perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. We're now going to move on to Mr. Barceau-Duval. Mr. Barceau-Duval, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Roux.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Roux, in answer to one of my questions, you said that my statements were false. Maybe today we won't have the time to explore what was false in what I said. But if you could write this in a report to the committee, it would be good for us to have the right information. Previously, I talked about jobs, and we know that the European Commission suspended twice the transaction of Air Canada due to a lack of cooperation. Now, according to the sales, Air Canada has the last word on this transaction. Transaction have been on the table for 2 years. It means that for 2 years, Air Transat has his hands tied.
Sorry, I cannot hear Mr. Barcelou Deville. The English and the French are exactly at the same volume, and I can't hear his question.
Is everyone getting that problem?
It gets a feedback, yeah.
So. Okay, Mr. Clerk, can we have that attended to?
Mr. Chairman, can I repeat my question?
Xavier, so I'm going to start it right now. Go ahead.
Thank you. So my question was, since the European Commission suspended twice its analysis of the transaction because of a lack of cooperation, and since Air Canada has the last word on this transaction, for 2 years Air Transat has its hands tied. So we heard that in the circular on this new sale of Air Transat to Air Canada refused twice to refuse credit to Air Transat in May and in August. What is the strategy of Air Canada? Is it to weaken Air Transat and trying to eliminate a competitor? Can you answer? I must say that we always cooperated with the regulation entities, and we are waiting impatiently for a decision on this. For us, it's a strategic decision, and it's very important for us that this transaction go forward so that both companies can protect jobs and create a world champion based here in Quebec. It's a pride, and we are convinced that the merging of these two companies will allow us to rebuild, to be much stronger. So very important players, in fact, supported this transaction. It has a lot of impact on the community. Caisse de dépôt du Québec, you know. I would like to ask another question to Mr. Gibbons.
It's actually overtime right now. We have to move on to our next speaker for 2.5 minutes. We have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I have a couple more questions for Mr. Rowe regarding regional routes. It's a topic that is very pertinent to the riding that I represent in Northwest BC. And currently, Air Canada has suspended service out of Prince Rupert, which is a community that depends very much on your scheduled passenger service. One of the things we've heard from communities is a real concern around the resumption of service. And what we saw when services resumed in Smithers, which is another regional route in Northwest BC, was that Air Canada offered flights online, and then when there weren't enough bookings, they canceled those flights. And we had a couple of rounds of that, and it really undermined the community's confidence that those scheduled flights would come back. I'm wondering if you can commit to working with communities like Prince Rupert to ensure that when there are the passenger volumes, that the resumption of service is as smooth as possible and that we avoid any unnecessary cancellations. Understanding that it's really difficult for the community to to purchase flights online and then have those flights canceled and not receive refunds. Is that a commitment you can make to communities?
Well, thanks for your question, Mr. Bachrach, and can assure you that we're committed to work with community to try to restart services, in the best possible delay. The difficulty for us as an airline is the difficulty to understand the demand, how it evolves, and when it's going to come back to a point that is sufficient to ensure services. That's always, the challenge we have. And of course, we talk to many airports, mayors, Chamber of Commerce to see how we can work together on reestablishing these services. The problem we have is, we are very in an uncertain time where demand pattern is always changing rapidly based on fact that we don't control.
Thank you, Mr. Roux. Mr. Bachrach, you got a few seconds left if you want to throw one in there.
I really appreciate your commitment to working with communities. Mr. Roux, the last question I have is earlier I asked you about the total number of tickets and passengers that have been affected by cancellations and your offer of vouchers, and you didn't have those numbers at your fingertips. I'm wondering if you would be willing to provide those figures to the committee after this meeting.
Mr. Roux, yes or no?
I will check internally and get back depending if this contains commercially sensitive information.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Backrack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We're now going to move on to the Conservatives. Mr. Shipley, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You caught me a little off guard. I actually thought at 4:30 we were ending, but thank you for that time.
I'm going to try and finish off this round between yourself and then following you, Mr. Alcurry.
Yep, that's all
Go
good.
ahead.
As I said, I thought we were ending, but I'm good to go. I'll start off then with Mr. Rowe. I'm sorry if I said that a little bit wrong there. You mentioned in your opening statement that there was a burn rate of $15 million a day. Did I catch
Mr. Rowe?
that right?
Sir,
And that was that private concessions for business? That was happening now.
sorry, I had an issue. My sound cut. Could you just repeat? I heard until 15 million per day.
Just saying, in your opening statement, you mentioned a burn rate of $15 million per day. Was that prior to layoffs and prior to making your savings, or is that what it's now currently?
This is the current based on our guidance for the third quarter or the fourth quarter of last year. This is our last between 14 and 16 million per day.
Yeah, and so we'll call it 15. So that's a lot of
Yeah.
money per day. You must be doing some business plans. How long can you keep this up for? As Mr. Cram mentioned in our last meeting, some people within your company were telling us that perhaps they're expecting 5 to 7 years downturn. There's no way you can continue to burn $15 million a day indefinitely.
There is, no company, no matter its size, can burn that, amount of money on an indefinite period. That's the reason why we really, have to have a plan to restart, understand how traffic can, how we can safely restart travel in this country. And in the meantime, how can government support carriers to go throughout this pandemic with long-term financing?
I'll go to.
It's obviously not not a situation that could be, that can stay for months and months. That's for sure.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'll go over to Mr. Gibbons too, because it's been interesting. It was just mentioned about the restart plan. This is something I'm very curious about. We're in a terrible position right now, Mr. Gibbons. We've got to get people back to work at some point in time, safely, obviously. You had mentioned a couple of things I want to mention to you. You mentioned 14,000 employees at WestJet. Many have left. Where have they gone? Have they gone on to other companies, or did you mean that was layoffs from your companies, or have they left to pursue other work, and now you won't be able to get people back when the startup eventually comes?
It's a mix. Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Shipley. It's a mixed bag. Not dissimilar to Air Canada, there are employees for whom we could safely assume would not return in the near term, and they have left the company. Many are struggling. We are headquartered in Alberta. It is a struggle, and I think that's why it's been obvious how central we are to the economic diversification in Alberta and how a global carrier based in Alberta is essential. So yeah, we are worried about skills. We are worried about skills expiring if the downturn continues. We've had employees, it's if you go on Facebook or these groups, and I hope that they're engaging you, people are very sad. It has been, the human toll in our company has been profound, and I think we're out of adjectives to describe it except to say it's just been very, 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 very sad. I don't know if that answers your question specifically. For many, it's been a struggle. For many, they have moved to other sectors. For many, they remain hopeful.
Mr. Shipley?
Yeah, it does answer. Thank you. And Mr. Gibbons, I hear what you're saying too. In one of our last meetings, I mentioned about the mental health of a lot of the employees. We had a stack of letters that I brought up last time, and my heart goes out to many people, not just in your industry, but a lot of people across Canada are struggling greatly right now. We want to make sure they're being looked after. So I'm sure within your company, you're doing everything you can to make sure your people who are feeling some added stress and obviously some mental health issues are getting that looked after too. Um, in regards to the startup plan, there's got to be a lot of aircraft right now sitting around. And someone had mentioned to me, I'm not an aircraft mechanic, but once there is a startup plan to get going, it has to be harmful to the planes to be sitting around. How long can they be sitting on tarmacs for, not being used before it becomes an issue? And does it take a while to then get them recertified once restartup is able to get going? I'll start with Mr. Gibbons.
Great question. My lack of technical expertise is going to be fully exposed here. My kindergarten-like understanding is that there's a rotational system that keeps the engines fresh. Like they don't just sit forever. They do have to move in and out, and there is a maintenance program that is required to upkeep, whether or not they're flying and in commercial service. So um, the planes will be there to use, and the MAX is a good example. That was a grounded fleet, but is now starting to be reintroduced into the market. So I think you could use that as guidance in terms of, the aircraft will be there. It's all of the other things that might not be there when the economic and health conditions change.
Thank you, Mr. Roux.
Yeah.
Short answer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in a technical expert like Mr. Gibbons, but in fact, there is some, there is some basic preservation work that can be done to aircraft, and airlines are doing this work to make sure that the fleet can fly when time will come. I would say the most challenging thing on that part is also keep the certification of the pilots, because pilots need to fly, not to lose their qualification to fly. So there is a rotation to ensure that, and these are high skill workers, and they need to work, and we need to have a plan to make sure that, they keep their certification.
Thank you, Mr. Roux. Thank you, Mr. Shipley. We're now going to move on to our last speaker for 5 minutes, Mr. Arcuri of the Liberals. Mr. Arcuri, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to our guests. Mr. Gibbons, I was happy to hear that your company decided to refund passengers. I heard that passengers who canceled their tickets following Health Canada guidelines did not get refunded. Do you think this led you to make difficult decisions such as layoffs? Do you think this crisis will worsen the shortage of pilots that already existed prior to the pandemic? Thank you for your question. I will reply in English if you may.
Mr. Curry, there was two questions. Question one was you appreciating our refund policy. Thank you very much for those words. The distinction between guest cancellations and carrier cancellations is a really important one. And it's a distinction that exists in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and in the US, which are jurisdictions that are the consumer advocates are pointing towards. So I do want to make that distinction. That is an important one that doesn't get a lot of remarks in the public sphere, but it is a critical distinction in terms of how the government and how your committee looks at the issue. I missed in translation what you were asking about with respect to, did the refunds make things difficult? I didn't quite get that, so I get clarity.
Did the refunds influence you to take decision that to lay off some employees? That's the.
Well, everything is an incredible balance. You have operational uncertainty. You have our commitment to do right by Canadians. You have our obligation to our employees. So everything is a really difficult balance. Look at the situation facing travel advisors and travel agents. As a result of refunds, they are in some very difficult circumstances, and we sympathize with them, and we acknowledge that, and we think the government should resolve those issues. But it is an incredible and delicate balance, all of those items. But on refunds, we felt it was the right thing to do. We did it, and it's a process that's going to take 6 to 9 months, and we're in the middle of that right now. And Canadians are getting their refunds, and we're pleased to provide them.
Mr. Leroux, did you have any comments?
Non, la question est adressée.
No, the question was addressed to Mr. Gibbons. Unless Mr. Aquari has a question for me? Yes, Mr. Rio? We know that the federal government imposed conditions linked to, or rather, reimbursing canceled flights, protecting regional routes, and honoring contracts with Canadian aerospatial companies. These are examples of conditions that the government imposed in order to help airline companies. Which of these issues are important for airline industries? Thank you for the question. These discussions are held by the federal government and airline carriers. When we are talking about conditions imposed on airline carriers, well, as Mr. Shipley said, you end up in a situation where you burn $15 million per day. So this is why we have to have a plan to protect our cash flow. So we have to see what type of aid can we get in order to meet all our needs. As for refunding passengers, well, it all depends on the financial aid provided by the government. And as for the other conditions you mentioned, well, these are part of the ongoing discussions. Airline carriers are open to discussions right now. Could you reply to the second part of the question since Mr. Gibbons didn't give an answer? Do you think this crisis will worsen the shortage of pilots, knowing that the situation already existed prior to the pandemic? This is a good question. Like I said, pilots are high-skilled employees. There was a shortage. There is also a high competition within Canada and abroad. I think the biggest issue will be that it might be difficult to keep our pilots here in Canada. It will all depend on the restart plans of the other countries as well. So yeah, there is a competition issue, with regard to keeping pilots. Which percentage of your fleet is inactive?
And thank you to the members of committee. Would you mind if I ask one quick question of the witnesses? It's not usually the norm. Does anybody mind?
I'd be happy for you to ask a question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Backrack. It's come up in past meetings, and I was actually surprised it didn't come up in this meeting. And that's the question of refunds on the clawbacks of travel agents. We've heard a lot from travel agents throughout the course of the past few months. So my question to both witnesses, and just a quick answer, is with respect to refunds to travel agents. Is this a direction that you're considering? We'll start off with Mr. Gibbons.
What is the question, Chair?
If in fact both you as well as Air Canada are considering either giving back or not clawing back the commissions that would otherwise go to travel agents.
So our commitment is to refund Canadians, and if you've purchased a $500 air ticket on your visa, you're expecting a $500 refund. So it's an unfortunate and unintended consequence of our progressive refund policy that these partners are hurting. And we've put those concerns to Minister Joly and to the federal government because we do believe that that is an unfortunate occurrence, and we believe it should be addressed by the government of Canada. Absolutely.
Thank you. So the answer is no. So I'll move on to Air Canada. Mr. Roux?
Well, I think your question, outlined the issue about certain issue about refund and the impact it can have on other stakeholders in aviation and other small and medium business in Canada. So, that's why for us, in implementing a refund policy, we also will consider the impact it has on our business partner, and that we expect to be part of the conversation with the federal government, as they have mentioned this as a condition as well on support for airlines.
Okay, so again, the answer is no at this time, but both are looking at considerations in discussions with government. So, well, thank you for that answer to both of you, and as well as thank you for your time today and participating in a discussion with members of the committee. We are going to be expecting a report back, and I'm sure the testimony that you've given to the committee will help populate that report. So once again, I thank you for your time, and members as well to you. I thank you for your questions and thank you for your time today as well. I am now going to adjourn this portion of the meeting to then come back into to an in-camera meeting, re-adjourn or gather at the in-camera portion of the meeting. So I will ask members to log out and then log back in for that portion of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.